My husband sprinted past my bleeding body in the emergency room to demand a plastic surgeon for his childhood friend's scratched forehead. While I lay choking on my own blood with a punctured lung, he refused to sign my life-saving surgery consent form because her panic attack was his priority. I signed my own papers before blacking out. When I woke up, his first words to me were not relief that I survived, but a furious rant about how much my accident was going to cost his insurance premiums. He had no idea the financial empire he thought he controlled actually belonged entirely to me. My name is Sloane, 33 years old, and the man who promised to love me in sickness and in health just signed his own financial death warrant. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to save yourself when the person who promised to protect you walked away. The harsh fluorescent lights blinded me as paramedics wheeled my gurney down the frantic corridor. Every breath felt like swallowed glass. My chest burned with the agonizing pressure of a punctured lung. Right beside me, another medical team wheeled in Vanessa. She was clutching her face, sobbing hysterically over a superficial cut on her forehead. The car crash had shattered my side of the vehicle, leaving her barely scratched. Liam burst through the sliding double doors. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale with panic. My heart fluttered with a desperate sense of relief. I tried to reach out my bloodied hand, trying to form his name. He sprinted right past my gurney. The rush of air from his jacket brushed my cheek as he threw himself over Vanessa. He grabbed the attending trauma doctor by the collar. "You need to help her right now," Liam screamed. "She is having a severe panic attack. Get the best plastic surgeon in this hospital. Her face cannot be scarred." The doctor pried Liam's hands off his uniform. "Sir, your wife is in critical condition. She has internal bleeding and a collapsed lung. We need your signature on this consent form immediately to rush her into the operating room." A nurse shoved a clipboard into Liam's chest. I watched through half-open eyes, gasping for air, waiting for my husband to turn around, waiting for him to run to my side. Liam batted the clipboard away, sending the pen clattering across the floor. "Just give her some painkillers," he yelled. "Vanessa is in shock. She needs a specialist right now. You are ignoring a severe psychological trauma." The nurse stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, your wife is drowning in her own blood. If we do not operate in the next 3 minutes, she will die. I cannot deal with her dramatics right now." Liam snapped completely, turning his back to my gurney and wrapping his arms around a weeping Vanessa. "Get the plastic surgeon." The metallic taste of iron coated my tongue. The cold realization hit me harder than the impact of the crash itself. The man I had married, the financial lawyer who swore to protect me, was actively letting me die to comfort his childhood friend over a scratch. I forced my heavy eyelids open. I reached over the metal railing, my fingers trembling as I grasped the edge of the clipboard the nurse had retrieved. "Give it to me!" I choked out, blood spattering against my torn blouse. The nurse looked down at me, her eyes wide with panic. "I need a pen!" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. She quickly placed the pen in my hand. With the last ounce of strength I possessed, I scrawled my signature across the bottom of the surgical consent form. I authorized my own salvation while my husband stroked the hair of another woman. "Let us move," the trauma doctor shouted, shoving the gurney forward. The heavy doors of the surgical ward swung open, and the last thing I saw before the anesthesia dragged me into total darkness was Liam kissing the top of Vanessa's head. When I finally drifted back to consciousness, the sterile smell of the recovery room assaulted my senses. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound greeting me. I slowly turned my head. Liam was not sitting in the chair beside my bed. He was not holding my hand. He was pacing furiously at the foot of my bed, his phone pressed aggressively to his ear. "I do not care what the police report says," he barked into the receiver. "You are my insurance broker. You fix this. Do you have any idea how much a premium hike is going to cost me because my wife forgot where the brake pedal was?" He hung up the phone and glared at me. There was no relief in his eyes, no tears of joy that I had survived a major surgery. His jaw was clenched tight with pure anger. Do you realize what you have done? He demanded, marching to the side of my bed. You completely totaled a luxury SUV. Vanessa is traumatized. She might have a permanent scar right above her eyebrow because you could not control the vehicle. I was in the passenger seat, Liam. I said, my voice hoarse but completely steady. I was not driving. He crossed his arms, scoffing loudly. Do not try to shift the blame, Sloane. Vanessa told me everything. You started an argument, distracted her, and grabbed the wheel. You are lucky I am not having my firm sue you for her medical expenses. Before I could explain the reality of the police report, the hospital room door slammed open. His mother, Patricia, marched straight to my bedside and threw a thick stack of itemized hospital bills directly onto my lap. You will definitely pay for all of this, she angrily spat. The man I swore to love in sickness and in health stepped right over my bleeding body to demand a plastic surgeon for a scratch on his childhood friend's forehead. He refused to authorize my emergency surgery because her panic attack was his absolute priority. I had to sign my own consent forms while choking on my own blood. When I finally woke up, his first words were not relief that I survived, but a furious rant about how much my accident was going to cost his insurance premiums. He had no idea the financial empire he thought he controlled actually belonged entirely to me. My name is Sloane. I am 34 years old. The husband who left me to die just signed his own financial death warrant. If you have ever had to save yourself, when the person who promised to protect you walked away, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to see exactly how I destroyed his perfect illusion. The blaring sirens of the ambulance pierced the night air as the paramedics rushed my gurney through the sliding double doors of the emergency room. Every breath felt like inhaling crushed glass. My right lung was punctured and my ribs were shattered. Right beside me, another medical team wheeled in Vanessa. She was clutching her face and sobbing hysterically over a superficial cut above her eyebrow. The car crash had crushed my side of the vehicle entirely, leaving her practically unharmed. Liam sprinted through the emergency room entrance. His designer suit was wrinkled, and his face was pale with panic. My heart fluttered with a desperate sense of relief. I tried to reach out my bloodied hand to call his name. He sprinted right past my gurney. The rush of air from his jacket brushed my cheek as he threw himself over Vanessa. He grabbed the attending trauma doctor by the collar. You need to help her right now, Liam screamed. She is having a severe panic attack. Get the best plastic surgeon in this hospital immediately. Her face cannot be scarred. The doctor pried Liam's hands off his scrubs. Sir, your wife is in critical condition. She has massive internal bleeding and a collapsed lung. We need your signature on this consent form right now to rush her into the operating room. A nurse shoved a clipboard directly into Liam's chest. I watched through half-open eyes while gasping for air. I waited for my husband to turn around and run to my side. Liam batted the clipboard away with a violent swing of his arm. The pen clattered across the linoleum floor. Just give her some painkillers, Liam yelled. He completely turned his back to my gurney and wrapped his arms around a weeping Vanessa. Vanessa is in shock. She needs a specialist right now. You are ignoring a severe psychological trauma. The nurse stared at him in pure disbelief. Sir, your wife is drowning in her own blood. If we do not operate in the next 3 minutes, she will die. I cannot deal with her dramatics right now. Liam snapped. Get the plastic surgeon. The metallic taste of iron coated my tongue. The cold realization hit me harder than the impact of the crash itself. The financial lawyer who swore to protect me was actively letting me die to comfort his childhood friend over a scratch. I forced my heavy eyelids open. I reached over the metal railing with my fingers trembling. I grasped the edge of the clipboard the nurse had retrieved. Give it to me, I choked out. Blood spattered against my torn blouse as I spoke. The nurse looked down at me with her eyes wide with panic. I need a pen, I demanded. My voice was barely a whisper. She quickly placed a pen in my hand. With the absolute last ounce of strength I possessed, I scrawled my signature across the bottom of the surgical consent form. I authorized my own salvation while my husband stroked the hair of another woman. Let us move, the trauma doctor shouted. He shoved the gurney forward. The heavy doors of the surgical ward swung open. The last thing I saw before the anesthesia dragged me into total darkness was Liam kissing the top of Vanessa's head. When I finally drifted back to consciousness, the sterile smell of the recovery room assaulted my senses. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound greeting me. I slowly turned my head. Liam was not sitting in the chair beside my bed. He was not holding my hand. He was pacing furiously at the foot of my bed, with his phone pressed aggressively to his ear. "I do not care what the police report says," he barked into the receiver. "You are my insurance broker. You fix this. Do you have any idea how much a premium hike is going to cost me because my wife forgot where the brake pedal was?" He hung up the phone and glared at me. There was no relief in his eyes. There were no tears of joy that I had survived a major surgery. His jaw was clenched tight with pure anger. "Do you realize what you have done?" he demanded. He marched to the side of my bed. "You completely totaled a luxury SUV. Vanessa is traumatized. She might have a permanent scar right above her eyebrow because you could not control the vehicle." "I was in the passenger seat, Liam," I said. My voice was hoarse but completely steady. "I was not driving." He crossed his arms and scoffed loudly. "Do not try to shift the blame, Sloane. Vanessa told me everything. You started an argument, distracted her, and grabbed the wheel. You are lucky I am not having my firm sue you for her medical expenses." Before I could explain the reality of the police report, the hospital room door slammed open. His mother, Patricia, marched straight to my bedside. Her daughter, Rachel, followed closely behind her. Patricia threw a thick stack of itemized hospital bills directly onto my lap. "You will definitely pay for all of this," Patricia angrily spat. "That is a $15,000 premium VIP suite hospital bill. Liam's credit cards are completely maxed out because of your careless behavior. Vanessa deserves the VIP recovery wing after what your reckless driving did to her. You have always been a selfish liability to my son." Rachel crossed her arms and sneered at me. "Jamal and I had to cancel our dinner reservations because Liam called us in a panic. You should be ashamed of yourself, Sloane. Your little boutique valuation hobby does not bring in enough money to cover this kind of damage. Liam works 80 hours a week at his law firm to keep a roof over your head. The least you could do is be a supportive wife instead of acting like a jealous maniac and causing a car crash." Patricia leaned over my bed and pointed a manicured finger in my face. "You are going to drain whatever pathetic savings account you have and pay for Vanessa's room. She is a delicate girl. She needs luxury and quiet to recover from the trauma you inflicted on her. My son is not going to bear the financial burden of your incompetence." I looked down at the heavy stack of invoices resting on my hospital blanket. I looked at Patricia's furious face, then at Rachel's smug expression, and finally at Liam, who stood silently, letting his mother verbally attack his wife, who had just survived emergency surgery. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I slowly picked up the $15,000 VIP suite bill. With deliberate and measured movements, I tore the thick paper directly in half. The ripping sound echoed sharply in the quiet hospital room. Patricia gasped loudly and clutched her pearl necklace. "What is wrong with you?" she shrieked. I dropped the torn pieces onto the floor. "I was in the passenger seat, Patricia," I said with absolute calm. "The police report confirms that Vanessa yanked the steering wheel because she was throwing a temper tantrum about missing a turn. The officers breathalyzed her at the scene. She caused the accident." Liam stepped forward with his face turning red. "That is a lie. Vanessa said you attacked her." "Ask the highway patrol, Liam," I countered. "They took my statement before the paramedics put me under. They also pulled the dashcam footage from the commercial truck driving right behind us. It shows Vanessa physically taking both hands off the wheel to hit me before the car veered into the concrete divider. I am not paying a single cent for her luxury suite. Have Liam pay for his pet." Patricia opened her mouth to scream at me again. She raised her hand as if she wanted to strike me right there in the hospital bed. But before she could utter a single word, Liam's cell phone rang loudly from his jacket pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. His face drained of color entirely. He answered the call with a shaky voice. "Hello. Yes, this is Liam. What do you mean it was declined? I just checked that account yesterday." The room went completely silent as Liam listened to the person on the other end of the line. He paced away from the bed and rubbed his forehead in distress. "Run the card again," Liam demanded. "There must be a mistake. I am a partner at my law firm. My credit limit is exceptionally high. Just put Vanessa's room on the secondary card." "What do you mean that one bounced too?" He slowly lowered the phone from his ear. He looked at his mother in absolute horror. "The hospital administration just called from the VIP wing. They said every single credit card I provided for Vanessa's recovery suite has been completely declined. The accounts are frozen." I leaned back against my hospital pillows and stared at the ceiling. The heavy painkillers were finally starting to kick in, numbing the physical agony in my chest. But the emotional clarity I felt in that moment was sharper than a surgical scalpel. Liam had spent the last 4 years treating my multi-million-dollar private equity firm like a cute little hobby while he drowned himself in hidden debts to maintain his flashy lifestyle. He thought he held all the power. He thought I was trapped. He was about to find out exactly who funded his entire existence. I signed the against medical advice discharge papers with my fractured ribs protesting every breath. The nurses tried to stop me, warning me of lung complications, but the sterile walls of that hospital were suffocating me. I had to see the extent of my husband's betrayal with my own eyes. I hailed a premium rideshare, leaving Liam to argue with the billing department about his frozen assets. The drive to our suburban estate took 40 minutes. I bought this $2 million property in cash before Liam and I even got married, though he loved playing the king of the castle for our neighbors. The heavy oak front door unlocked with a quiet click. I stepped into the grand foyer, expecting silence. Instead, my boots hit something soft. I looked down. 6 black industrial garbage bags blocked the hallway. A sleeve of my custom-tailored Italian wool blazer spilled out of the top bag, crushed against a pair of muddy sneakers. My breath caught in my throat. I kicked the bag open further. My entire winter collection, silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and vintage dresses, was haphazardly shoved into trash bags like donated rags. I ignored the stabbing pain in my chest and marched up the curved mahogany staircase. Soft television chatter echoed from the master suite. I pushed the double doors open. The sight before me made my blood run cold. Vanessa was lounging against my custom-upholstered headboard. She was wearing my personalized silk monogrammed robe. A silver breakfast tray rested across her lap, holding half-eaten croissants and a crystal glass of imported orange juice. Liam was adjusting the pillows behind her back with a tender devotion he had never shown me in 4 years of marriage. He froze when he saw me standing in the doorway. He dropped the pillow. "What are you doing here?" Liam demanded. "You are supposed to be under observation for another 3 days." I stepped fully into the room. "Get out of my bed, Vanessa," I said. My voice was a low, dangerous whisper. Vanessa clutched the lapels of my silk robe and shrank back against the headboard, forcing a theatrical whimper. Liam immediately stepped between us, shielding her with his body. He held his hands up as if calming a wild animal. "Lower your voice, Sloane," Liam commanded. "She has severe PTSD from the crash. The doctor said she needs a stable, quiet environment to heal. Her apartment is too cramped and noisy. You can take the guest room down the hall." I stared at him. I stared at the man who had vowed to prioritize me above all others. "You put my clothes in garbage bags," I stated, pointing toward the hallway. "You moved your mistress into our marital bed while I was coughing up blood in a trauma ward." "She is not my mistress." Liam shot back, his face flushing with defensive anger. "She is my oldest friend, and she is suffering because of your reckless behavior. The least you can do is show some basic human decency and let her recover in peace. You have always been so rigid and unforgiving, Sloane. It is a terrible character flaw." Vanessa sniffled, wiping an invisible tear from her cheek. "I am so sorry, Sloane. I did not want to impose. Liam just insisted. He said you would not mind since you are always working anyway and barely use this room." "Take off my robe," I said. I took another step forward. "Take it off right now, or I will rip it off you and throw you down the staircase myself." Liam grabbed my arm tightly. "Do not threaten her. You are acting completely unhinged. This is exactly why my mother says you are impossible to deal with. Now go to the guest room and calm down before I call the police and have you removed for domestic disturbance." I wrenched my arm out of his grasp. "You cannot remove the sole property owner from her own home, Liam. Check the deed. It is under my trust. You are just a guest here." Before Liam could formulate another pathetic excuse, the sharp chime of the front doorbell echoed up the stairs. It rang twice, loud and demanding. Liam ran a hand through his hair, looking panicked. He practically sprinted out of the bedroom and down the stairs. I followed closely behind him, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs, refusing to let him out of my sight. He threw open the front door. Jamal and Rachel stood on the porch. Jamal was dressed in his signature Tom Ford suit, aggressively chewing a piece of gum. Rachel held a designer handbag she could not actually afford. Jamal shoved past Liam without waiting for an invitation. He strolled into my foyer, stepping right over the garbage bags containing my clothes. He loosened his silk tie and marched straight into the kitchen, dropping a massive leather-bound real estate folder onto my marble island with a heavy thud. Sloane, Jamal called out, his booming voice echoing through the open floor plan. "Get in here. We need to talk about refinancing your little house." I walked slowly into the kitchen. Rachel trailed behind her husband, giving me a patronizing smile. Jamal leaned against the counter, drumming his fingers against the leather folder. His entire demeanor dripped with the arrogant confidence of a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. Liam told me about the little misunderstanding at the hospital, Jamal started. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not acknowledge my visible injuries. "Apparently your credit cards are having some technical issues. Liam has a lot of legal fees piling up from that contract dispute at his firm last month. Plus Vanessa's medical bills are going to be astronomical since you ruined her face. You need liquid cash fast." I stood across the island from him. I crossed my arms, shielding my broken ribs. "I do not need liquid cash, Jamal. Liam's debts are his own problem." Jamal laughed, a booming, condescending bark. "That is not how marriage works, sweetheart. You are a team, and right now your team is drowning. I brought the paperwork for a cash-out refinance. The market value on this place is high enough that we can pull $500,000 out today. I already called a buddy at the bank to expedite the underwriting. All you need to do is sign on the dotted line." Rachel leaned against the refrigerator. "Jamal is a senior investment broker, Sloane. You should listen to him. Do not embarrass yourself by pretending to understand the math. Just sign the papers. A good wife makes sacrifices for her family's reputation." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at Liam, who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. He had called Jamal. He had arranged this ambush while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. He was trying to drain the equity from my home to pay for Vanessa's luxury care and his own hidden mistakes. I reached out and placed my hand flat on the leather folder. Jamal smiled, pulling a gold pen from his inner jacket pocket and offering it to me. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a naive, terrified woman willing to surrender my assets to keep the peace. He had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. My financial empire was hidden behind walls of corporate anonymity, and I was about to unleash absolute ruin upon all of them. Jamal tapped his gold pen against the thick stack of legal documents resting on my marble kitchen island. The sharp metallic clicking sound filled the tense silence in the room. He leaned forward, resting his weight on his knuckles to intentionally invade my personal space. "Sit down," Sloane, Jamal ordered. He spoke with the slow, exaggerated patience one might use when addressing an unruly toddler. "Liam is currently drowning in litigation debt. The restructuring at his law firm did not go as planned, and his billable hours are severely down. We need liquidity, and we need it today. You are going to sign a cash-out refinance on this property to pull $500,000 out of the equity." I looked from Jamal's smug face to the paperwork. The bold print at the top indicated a shadow lender notorious for exorbitant interest rates and predatory terms. "You want me to mortgage my home with a subprime lender to pay off my husband's secret debts," I stated clearly. Rachel let out a loud theatrical sigh and stepped up beside her husband. She crossed her arms, pulling her cashmere cardigan tight around her shoulders. "Jamal is a senior investment broker, Sloane," Rachel scolded. "Do not embarrass yourself by pretending to understand the complicated math here. He spent the entire morning pulling favors to get this loan approved so quickly. You just need to sign it. A good wife sacrifices when her husband hits a rough patch. It is the absolute least you can do considering your little boutique valuation hobby barely pays the utility bills around here. Jamal pushed the massive stack of papers across the smooth marble surface until it hit my hand. He held the gold pen out to me with a demanding glare. Rachel is completely right, Jamal said smoothly. We ran the loan-to-value ratio. There is plenty of equity sitting in these walls doing absolutely nothing. Liam needs capital to clear his accounts and cover Vanessa's private recovery expenses. Your little interior decorating business, or whatever it is you do downtown, does not generate the kind of cash flow required to maintain this family's luxury lifestyle. I am throwing you a financial lifeline here. Take the pen. I did not take the pen. I looked past Jamal and Rachel straight down the hallway toward the master's suite. Liam was standing in the doorway of our bedroom, his arms crossed over his chest, watching his brother-in-law try to bully me into signing away my home. Vanessa peered out from behind Liam's shoulder, wearing my silk robe, casually sipping her orange juice. They all thought I was trapped. They all thought I was a financially illiterate housewife who would buckle under the pressure of an aggressive male broker. I turned my back on Jamal and walked away from the kitchen island. "Where are you going?" Jamal barked, his professional facade instantly slipping into outright aggression. "I have a notary waiting in the car outside. We do not have time for a temper tantrum." I ignored him entirely. I walked straight down the hallway, forcing Liam to step aside as I pushed past him into the master bedroom. Vanessa gasped and pulled the bedsheets up to her chin, playing the fragile victim. I walked directly to my walk-in closet, bypassing the garbage bags of ruined clothes they had dumped in the hall, and pulled a sleek hard-shell carry-on bag from the top shelf. Liam followed me into the closet. His face was flushed with panicked fury. "What are you doing?" Liam demanded. His voice was a harsh hiss. "Jamal stuck his neck out to secure that capital for us. You are humiliating me in front of my family. Get back out there and sign the documents right now." I unzipped the suitcase and began pulling sharp, tailored business suits from their hangers. I folded them with precise, deliberate movements, placing them neatly into the luggage. "I am not signing anything, Liam," I said without looking up from my packing, "and I am not staying in a house where your mistress is eating pastries in my bed." Vanessa whined loudly from the bedroom. "Liam, she is stressing me out." My heart is racing. The doctor said I cannot have elevated blood pressure. "You hear that?" Liam grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to leave a bruise. "You are endangering her health. Stop packing and get out to the kitchen." I ripped my arm out of his grasp with such intense force that he stumbled backward against the shoe rack. I zipped the suitcase shut and gripped the handle tight. "I am leaving," I stated, my voice echoing off the closet walls. "Enjoy the mess you made." I rolled the suitcase out of the closet and toward the bedroom door. Jamal and Rachel had walked down the hallway and were now blocking the threshold. Jamal looked furious that I had dared to walk away from his high-pressure sales pitch. Liam quickly recovered his balance and darted in front of me, cutting off my only exit. He reached into his tailored slacks and pulled out a heavy platinum credit card. He held it up right in front of my face. It was the joint card linked to the primary account he thought controlled our entire lives. "If you walk out that door, I cut off your allowance," Liam threatened. His voice dripped with arrogant malice. "I will call the bank right now and cancel this card. You will have absolutely nothing. You will not be able to afford a hotel. You will not be able to buy dinner. You will be on the street begging to come back here. Put the bag down." Rachel smirked from the doorway. "Listen to your husband, Sloane. You do not want to be out there on your own with zero financial support." I looked at the platinum card shining in Liam's hand. I looked at his smug, victorious smile. He genuinely believed that piece of plastic was the chain keeping me tied to him. I reached out and plucked the card from his fingers. Before he could react, I bent the thick plastic backward. With a sharp, satisfying crack, the card snapped clean in two. Liam gasped, his eyes widening in total shock. I dropped the broken pieces onto the hardwood floor right at his expensive leather shoes. "Keep the pennies, Liam," I said, my tone completely devoid of emotion. I pushed my suitcase forward, forcing Liam to step out of my path. I stopped right in front of Jamal, who was staring at the broken credit card on the floor. I looked the aggressive broker directly in the eyes. And Jamal, I tilted my head slightly. You cannot refinance a house that is held in an impenetrable blind trust. Jamal froze. The confident swagger instantly drained from his rigid posture. He looked down at the massive real estate folder he was still clutching under his arm. He frantically flipped it open, his eyes scanning the dense legal text on the property deed. What is she talking about? Liam demanded, looking back and forth between us in a panic. Jamal, what does the deed say? Jamal's hands began to shake visibly. The color completely vanished from his face as his eyes locked onto the ownership clause. He looked up at me in absolute horror, finally realizing that the property did not belong to Sloane and Liam as a married couple. It belonged to a heavily fortified corporate entity. The deed, Jamal stammered, his voice cracking with fear. It is not in your name, Liam. It is held by a corporate trust. I cannot touch this equity. No bank will ever approve a loan against this without the primary trustee's corporate seal. Exactly, I said. I did not wait for them to process the harsh reality of their failure. I walked right through the doorway, leaving Rachel standing frozen with her mouth hanging open. I rolled my suitcase down the grand staircase, leaving the four of them standing in the master suite, completely trapped in a financial cage they had just realized was locked from the outside. The heavy glass doors of the private elevator parted smoothly. I stepped onto the polished obsidian floor of the penthouse suite, high above the Manhattan skyline. The chaotic suburban nightmare I had just walked away from was instantly replaced by the steady electric hum of high-stakes finance. This was Apex Holdings. This was my empire. A team of junior analysts parted like the Red Sea as I strode down the central corridor. My executive assistant Marcus was already at my side before I even reached my desk. He handed me a steaming espresso and a thick stack of confidential financial briefs. I was not the struggling interior decorator playing with a boutique valuation hobby that Liam and his arrogant family loved to mock. I was the founder and chief executive officer of a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring and liquidating distressed assets. I bought sinking ships, stripped them down to the studs, and sold the valuable scraps to the highest bidder. Liam was about to become my absolute most satisfying acquisition yet. I walked into my corner office and dropped my carry-on bag by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The panoramic view of the bustling city below always centered my mind. Today, I needed that sharp, ruthless focus more than ever. My lead corporate attorney, Pierce, was already waiting for me at the long mahogany conference table. Pierce was a shark in a custom-tailored suit, a man who lived and breathed for aggressive legal combat. He did not offer any empty sympathies about my visible physical injuries or my ruined marriage. He simply pushed a sleek silver tablet across the polished wood surface toward me. I took a long sip of my dark espresso and picked the device up. Liam is moving fast, Pierce stated flatly, crossing his arms. His utter arrogance is almost impressive considering his actual position. I scrolled through the digital legal document displayed brightly on the screen. It was an emergency divorce petition filed less than an hour ago in family court. Liam was demanding immediate temporary spousal support to the tune of $20,000 a month. He was also staking a legal claim to half of the suburban estate and demanding that I pay all of his outstanding legal fees. The grounds for the emergency filing were explicitly listed as my sudden abandonment of the marital home and severe emotional cruelty toward him and his injured companion. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh that sent a wicked spike of pain radiating right through my fractured ribs. Emotional cruelty. He was actually trying to play the desperate victim while his mistress wore my clothes and slept comfortably in my bed. He thinks he can bleed me dry through the family court system, I said, setting the tablet face down on the table. He assumes because I walked out the front door I surrendered the territory. He wants to force a quick, lucrative settlement by burying me in aggressive, rapid-fire litigation. Pierce adjusted his expensive glasses. He is relying entirely on the illusion that you are financially dependent on his income, or at least terrified of his legal expertise. We already ran a complete shadow audit on his personal finances, Sloane. Liam is functionally bankrupt. He has leveraged every single asset he has access to, including borrowing heavily against his future partnership distributions at the firm. If he does not secure a massive cash influx within 30 days, his partners will force him out onto the street. I nodded slowly, feeling the intricate pieces of the puzzle snapping firmly into their proper places. That is exactly why Jamal was so desperately eager to force that cash-out refinance this morning. They are all drowning in debt, and they view my private assets as their personal life raft. They think they can simply bully me into opening the vault. Pierce leaned back in his heavy leather chair and tapped the glowing screen of the tablet. The ridiculous divorce petition minimized, and a new video file popped up in its place. The hidden footage was slightly grainy, but the audio was perfectly, horrifyingly clear. It was a live feed directly from the discreet security cameras I had personally installed in the suburban estate months ago, when I first suspected Liam was hiding things from me. The video showed my pristine, sunlit living room. Liam and Vanessa were sitting extremely close together on the white Italian leather sofa. They were not packing my things or meeting with Jamal anymore. They were actively celebrating my departure. Liam was popping the cork on an expensive bottle of my vintage champagne. He poured 2 brimming glasses and handed one over to Vanessa. She took a long sip and let out a loud, victorious laugh that echoed through my house. She leaned back against the plush cushions and casually placed her free hand over her stomach. She slowly rubbed a very slight but completely unmistakable rounded curve. "We finally got rid of the barren witch," Vanessa said. Her voice dripped with pure, unfiltered malice. She looked up at Liam with a deeply greedy smile. "This baby is going to inherit absolutely everything she built." Liam leaned down and kissed her softly on the forehead, stroking her hair. "I promise you," Liam replied. "I am going to take her for every last dime. She will be incredibly lucky if I leave her with the clothes on her back." I stared at the frozen frame of the video. The sheer audacity of their cruel celebration washed entirely over me. For 4 grueling years of marriage, Liam had watched me inject myself with harsh hormones, endure painful fertility treatments, and weep over countless negative pregnancy tests. He had held my hand while I cried over the children we could not seem to have. All the while, he was actively building a secret family with a woman who thought my absolute deepest heartbreak was just a hilarious joke. I smiled. The smile that spreads across my face was not born of joy. It was the cold edge of absolute realization. I tapped the screen, pausing the video exactly on the frame of Liam's hand, resting over Vanessa's slightly rounded stomach. The scattered pieces of the last 4 years reassembled in my mind, shifting from a personal tragedy into a meticulously crafted horror story. Liam had held me while I sobbed in clinic parking lots. He had tenderly wiped away my tears when the doctor delivered another negative result. He had sat beside me on our living room sofa, softly whispering that my demanding career was creating too much cortisol. He told me my stress was the sole reason my body was failing us. He convinced me that I was broken and defective. I had subjected my body to grueling rounds of hormone injections. I had endured invasive retrieval surgeries and debilitating recoveries. I had truly believed I was the barren witch Vanessa had just mocked. My face turned to solid ice. The sheer depth of his cruelty was staggering. He had weaponized my deepest vulnerability to keep me completely off balance and dependent on his emotional support. He played the martyr husband, standing bravely by his infertile wife, all while hiding his own secrets. Pierce watched me from across the mahogany table. He had seen me dismantle hostile corporate takeovers without breaking a sweat, but he saw the visceral shift in my posture right then. "Are you all right?" Sloane Pierce asked quietly. "I am perfect," I replied. My voice sounded hollow, vibrating with a new lethal energy. I pushed the tablet back toward him. "Add a countersuit for medical fraud and intentional infliction of severe emotional distress. But do not file it yet. I need one more piece of ammunition before we drop the bomb." I stood up from the conference table. My fractured ribs throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the adrenaline surging through my veins. I pulled my cell phone from my jacket pocket. Marcus stepped forward with a fresh financial brief, but I held up a single finger to silence the entire room. I dialed a number I had burned into my memory from years of desperate hope. The phone rang twice before the receptionist at the Manhattan Fertility Clinic answered. I skipped the polite greetings. I demanded to be transferred directly to Dr. Aris immediately. The receptionist tried to put me on hold, but I cited my platinum patient identification number and threatened to pull my clinic funding. 30 seconds later, the head specialist was on the line. Sloane, Dr. Aris said, his voice laced with professional concern. I was incredibly sorry to hear about your accident. How is your recovery progressing? I cut him off completely. My recovery is fine. I need you to open the digital archives right now. Pull the original diagnostic files from 4 years ago. I want the very first round of testing Liam and I completed before we started the in vitro fertilization process. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. Sloane, as I explained back then, Liam explicitly invoked his patient privacy rights regarding his specific diagnostic metrics. He forbade me from sharing his individual biological results with you. He said it was a matter of male pride and requested we focus solely on your treatment protocols to spare his ego. I gripped the edge of my desk. He used privacy laws to hide his deception. He manipulated the clinical boundaries to ensure I took the sole blame for our infertility. Liam just filed for a hostile divorce and demanded half my estate, I stated, keeping my tone deadly flat. I paid every single invoice for your clinic from my private corporate trust. That makes me the primary financial guarantor of those records. Read the file to me right now, or I will have Pierce subpoena your entire clinic by noon and drag your professional reputation through a public deposition. I heard the frantic clicking of a keyboard over the speakerphone. Dr. Aris was silent for a long moment as he bypassed the security locks on the archived server. Pierce stood perfectly still. Marcus held his breath. I have the file open, Dr. Aris whispered. His voice was drained of its usual confidence. Sloane, I swear to you, I wanted to discuss this together as a couple, but Liam threatened to sue the clinic for privacy violations if I disclose this to you. Read the results, I commanded. I heard him take a deep, shaky breath. Sloane, your initial diagnostic panels were absolutely flawless. Your ovarian reserve was exceptionally high. Your hormone levels were perfect. You are perfectly fertile. There is nothing wrong with your body. The room spun slightly, but I locked my knees and stood tall. And Liam? Dr. Aris swallowed hard. Liam's sperm analysis showed a 0 viable count. We ran the test 3 separate times to be absolutely certain. He has a rare congenital obstruction. Liam was diagnosed with irreversible sterility 4 years ago. It is biologically impossible for him to father a child. I let the words hang in the silent office. Irreversible sterility, biologically impossible. Liam had known. He had known before the very first needle ever pierced my skin. He had watched me destroy my own body to fix a problem that was entirely his own. He had watched me cry. He had watched me break. He let me carry the crushing weight of being inadequate all while he knew he was completely sterile. I ended the call without saying goodbye and tossed the phone onto the conference table. Pierce and Marcus stared at me, waiting for the inevitable explosion. They expected screaming crying or the chaotic shattering of glass. Instead, I looked back at the frozen video frame of Vanessa rubbing her pregnant belly. She was gloating about carrying the Blackwell heir. She was celebrating the ultimate victory over the barren wife. She was relying on that baby to secure her luxurious future and drain my bank accounts. I looked at Liam's face in the video, so desperately proud of his impending fatherhood, completely oblivious to his own biological reality. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had secured a child with his mistress while plotting to steal my fortune. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. The absolute brilliant irony of the situation was almost intoxicating. Vanessa had played her hand perfectly, except she had chosen a sterile mark. The baby isn't Liam's. The harsh sunlight pouring through the massive windows of my suburban estate did absolutely nothing to warm the freezing panic currently suffocating Liam and Jamal. 10 miles away from my corporate headquarters, The reality of their catastrophic miscalculation was finally settling over my pristine marble kitchen. Liam sat hunched over the massive kitchen island, his hands trembling as he furiously clicked the refresh button on his laptop. The screen glared back at him, displaying an endless sea of bright red banners across his personal and joint banking portals. Every single account was completely locked. The emergency divorce petition he had so proudly filed that morning had immediately triggered a standard family court financial injunction. In his desperate rush to claim half of my assets and secure a massive spousal support order, Liam had legally paralyzed his own access to every single dime of contested marital capital. Jamal paced the length of the kitchen like a caged predator. His expensive Tom Ford suit jacket was thrown carelessly over one of my custom bar stools. His silk tie was violently yanked loose around his neck. He was sweating profusely, muttering under his breath as he checked his ringing cell phone for the 5th time in 3 minutes. Jamal was not just angry about Liam's frozen accounts. Jamal was fighting for his own professional survival. For the past 6 months, he had been aggressively utilizing high-risk insider trading strategies, leveraging his own clients' portfolios to cover massive personal margin calls. He had bet everything on a corporate merger that had suddenly collapsed overnight. The major brokers were calling in their debts by the end of the business day. If Jamal did not secure an immediate, untraceable influx of cash, his firm would conduct an audit, the Securities and Exchange Commission would be notified, and he would be facing decades in a federal penitentiary. "This is an absolute disaster," Liam Jamal shouted, slamming his hand down on the marble countertop. "I told you to secure the cash-out refinance before you filed the legal paperwork. You triggered a total asset freeze. My institutional lenders are threatening to liquidate my entire portfolio by 5 o'clock. I need that $500,000 right now, or we are both completely ruined." Liam stared blankly at the laptop screen, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. "I did not know the judge would freeze the secondary accounts." Liam stammered, his voice cracking with rising panic. "I thought the injunction only applied to Sloane's primary corporate holdings. I have $50,000 in legal retainers due tomorrow. Vanessa needs her private medical care funded today, or the hospital will discharge her. I am completely drowning here, Jamal. You have to fix this. You promised you could fix this." Jamal stopped pacing. He took a deep, jagged breath and ran his hands over his face. He leaned over the kitchen island, invading Liam's space, with a dark, calculating intensity. "There is one remaining option," Jamal said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I have a contact at a private shadow lending firm based out of Manhattan. They specialize in high-risk, completely unregulated bridge loans. They do not run standard underwriting procedures, and they bypass traditional asset freezes because they operate entirely outside the conventional banking system. They can wire $500,000 into an offshore holding account within 60 minutes. Liam looked up, a desperate glimmer of hope flashing in his eyes. "Do it. Call them right now. Whatever the interest rate is, just accept it." "It is not that simple," Jamal snapped. "This firm requires the property to be used as hard collateral. Because the house is held in that impenetrable blind trust, you failed to mention the digital loan documents absolutely require the legal signature of the primary trust beneficiary. The loan cannot be executed without Sloane's direct authorization." Liam slammed his laptop shut. "She is never going to sign it. She walked out. She snapped my credit card in half. She knows exactly what she is doing." Jamal grabbed Liam by the shoulders. "Then you are going to sign it for her," Jamal ordered. "You lived with the woman for 4 years. You have signed for her packages. You have signed her holiday cards. You know her exact signature. We pull up the digital application on your tablet, you use the stylus to trace her name, and I countersign the document as the verified broker of record. My credential seal will automatically bypass their secondary verification process." Liam shook his head violently, pulling away from his brother-in-law. "You are talking about forging a legal financial document. You are talking about federal wire fraud. If we get caught, I will lose my law license. I will be disbarred." If you do not sign this document, you are going to lose a lot more than your license, Jamal snarled, pointing a finger directly at Liam's chest. You are going to lose this house. You are going to lose Vanessa. I am going to lose my freedom, and I will personally make sure the ensuing investigation drags your name through the absolute deepest mud. You put thousands of dollars of landscaping into this property. You upgraded the security systems. You paid for the minor repairs. You practically built the equity in this estate. That money belongs to you just as much as it belongs to her. She abandoned you. She is trying to starve you out. Take what is yours. From the master bedroom upstairs, Vanessa let out a loud theatrical wail, complaining about the pain in her head and demanding her expensive medications. The sound echoed down the grand staircase, wrapping around Liam like a vice. His desperation finally eclipsed his fear. His breathing quickened as he grabbed his digital tablet from the counter. Bring up the portal, Liam whispered, his eyes dark with frantic determination. Jamal quickly navigated to the secure landing page of the private lending firm. He loaded the expedited bridge loan application, filling in the property details and the requested sum of $500,000. He flipped the tablet around and handed Liam the electronic stylus. Liam did not hesitate. With fluid practice motions, he perfectly traced my sweeping, distinct cursive across the digital signature line. He had forged my name on countless minor deliveries, but this time he was signing away his life. Jamal immediately grabbed the tablet, verified the document using his official broker credentials, and hit submit. The screen flashed green. The funds were approved for immediate transfer. They both exhaled heavily, leaning against the marble counters, firmly believing they had just saved themselves from financial annihilation. Back in my sleek glass-walled penthouse office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, the silence was absolute. Pierce stood silently near the window reviewing the hostile divorce petition. I sat behind my massive obsidian desk, staring at the paused video of Vanessa rubbing her stomach. Suddenly, the sharp, crisp ping of an urgent notification echoed through the quiet room. I glanced over at my private encrypted financial terminal. An emergency red banner flashed across the screen. It was an automated high-level alert from the security division of my high-risk lending subsidiary, a corporate entity I had built specifically to swallow desperate debtors whole. I tapped the keyboard, opening the secure file. My eyes scanned the digital loan application, tracing the names, the property address, and the requested sum of $500,000. I looked at the perfectly forged signature resting right next to Jamal's official broker seal. The sheer magnificent stupidity of their crime was a masterpiece. Pierce, I said softly, my voice laced with lethal amusement. My idiot husband and brother-in-law just committed federal wire fraud by borrowing $500,000 from my own company. Pierce practically lunged across the mahogany table to stare at the flashing red alert on my terminal. For a corporate litigator, he rarely showed genuine shock. Right now, his jaw was visibly rigid. He pulled off his glasses, exhaling a long breath. I need to freeze this portal immediately, Pierce stated, his professional instincts kicking into overdrive. We are calling the authorities right now. We have the digital footprint, and Jamal verified the transaction. This is an open and shut case of aggravated identity theft and financial fraud. They are going to be in handcuffs before dinner. He reached out to tap the decline button on my terminal screen. I caught his wrist midair. My grip was unyielding. I looked up at him, my expression void of any mercy. No. Authorize the wire transfer. Let them take the money. Pierce stared at me as if I had suddenly lost my mind. Sloane, they just committed a massive felony. You cannot willingly hand them $500,000 of your own capital. It is not just a felony yet. I corrected him smoothly, releasing his wrist and turning back to the keyboard. Right now, it is a localized instance of fraudulent borrowing. It is a domestic dispute over marital assets in a suburban zip code. I do not want them facing a simple slap on the wrist from a sympathetic family court judge who buys Liam's sob story about a stressed husband trying to protect his estate. I want them buried. Once they spend a single cent across state lines, it becomes a federal felony investigated by the FBI. I reached out and pressed the heavy enter key. The screen flashed a brilliant confirming green. The funds were instantly released from the shadow accounts, and sent hurtling through the digital ether directly into the joint account Liam foolishly believed he still controlled. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of my espresso. Now we wait for the rats to feast. 10 miles away, the atmosphere in the suburban kitchen shifted from suffocating panic to absolute euphoria. Liam stared at his banking application as the balance suddenly ballooned by $500,000. He let out a breathless, hysterical laugh, slamming his laptop shut and pulling Jamal into a brief, aggressive hug. "We did it," Liam cheered, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "I told you she was too stupid to monitor the secondary trust notifications. She probably thinks this is just a routine dividend deposit." Jamal did not waste a single second celebrating. He was already typing furiously on his own mobile device, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate greed. He accessed the newly inflated joint account and immediately initiated a massive wire transfer. $100,000 vanished from the balance in a heartbeat, routed directly to a discreet shell company registered in Delaware. He was funneling the stolen capital straight across state lines to artificially inflate a collapsing tech stock, desperately trying to cover his disastrous margin calls before the closing bell. Federal wire fraud. Interstate financial manipulation. Jamal had just sealed his own fate with a few taps on a glass screen. Liam did not even notice the missing $100,000. He was already running up the grand staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. He burst into the master suite where Vanessa was dramatically lounging against the silk pillows, complaining about the stress of the morning. "Get dressed," Liam commanded, flashing a brilliant, arrogant smile. "We are going into the city." 2 hours later, Liam and Vanessa were standing inside an exclusive diamond boutique on Fifth Avenue. Liam felt invincible. He felt like the masterful provider who had successfully conquered his stubborn, useless wife. He watched with profound satisfaction as Vanessa tried on a spectacular $50,000 diamond tennis necklace. The brilliant stones caught the overhead lights sparkling against her collarbone. "It is absolutely stunning," Vanessa cooed, turning side to side in the tall mirror. "But Liam, are you sure we can afford this right now? I thought Jamal said things were tight." Liam pulled out his platinum debit card, the one linked directly to the freshly stolen funds, and handed it to the eager sales associate. "We have plenty of liquidity," Liam said smoothly, wrapping his arms around Vanessa from behind and kissing her neck. "Consider it a push present for the mother of my actual child. Sloane is out of our way, and her little boutique business is going to pay for our entire future. Wear it out of the store." The transaction processed flawlessly. Liam had just converted stolen corporate funds into a highly traceable, extremely expensive piece of jewelry for his mistress. The federal snare was pulling tighter by the second. Back in my penthouse office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the obsidian floor. Pierce and I were meticulously documenting every single digital breadcrumb Liam and Jamal were currently leaving across the eastern seaboard. My terminal continued to ping softly, registering the massive Delaware wire transfer and the exorbitant jewelry purchase. "They are doing exactly what you predicted," Pierce murmured, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "The sheer arrogance is going to destroy them." My cell phone began to vibrate against the mahogany desk. The caller ID displayed the name of Liam's aggressive, high-priced divorce attorney. I let it ring 3 times, allowing the tension to build before pressing the speakerphone button. "This is Sloane." "Sloane, glad I caught you," the attorney began. His voice was dripping with that patronizing, sympathetic tone men use when they think they have a woman backed into a corner. "I am representing your husband in the ongoing divorce proceedings. Liam is offering an olive branch. Come to the house for Thanksgiving dinner to sign a quiet settlement, or we release fabricated financial records to the SEC that will ruin your little valuation business." I smiled across the desk at Pierce. "I will bring the wine." I parked my sleek black sedan at the very edge of the long, circular driveway. The sprawling suburban estate looked exactly as I had left it, but the vehicles parked out front told a pathetic story of financial desperation. Jamal had parked his leased Porsche directly in front of the main portico. Rachel's oversized luxury SUV sat aggressively on the manicured grass. Liam's imported sports car, currently carrying 3 missed payment warnings in my shadow corporate files, took up the center spot. They were a fleet of depreciating assets bought entirely on suffocating credit. I grabbed the expensive bottle of vintage red wine I had brought from my private collection and walked up the front steps. I did not bother to knock. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the grand foyer. The air instantly assaulted my senses. The house absolutely reeked of Vanessa's cloyingly sweet, cheap floral perfume. It masked the familiar scent of cedar and citrus I had carefully curated for this home. I walked past the foyer and stepped into the massive open-concept kitchen. Patricia Liam's domineering mother stood at the marble island carving a massive roasted turkey. She was draped in a silk blouse, carefully placing the best cuts of meat onto a silver platter. Vanessa sat perched on a bar stool nearby, sipping sparkling cider and wearing a fitted cashmere sweater that I distinctly recognized from my own winter wardrobe. "Oh, look," Patricia announced, not even bothering to glance up from the turkey. "The prodigal wife returns. I hope you washed your hands before coming inside Sloane. Vanessa has a highly sensitive immune system right now, and we simply cannot risk any unnecessary stress on the baby." Vanessa offered a sickeningly sweet pout. "I am just so exhausted, Patricia. Building a human being takes so much energy. I do not know how normal women manage it without fainting." "You are doing wonderfully, my dear," Patricia cooed, handing Vanessa a small plate of white meat. "You just rest, and let us take care of everything." I placed the bottle of wine firmly on the marble counter. The heavy glass made a sharp thud that echoed through the kitchen. Neither of them acknowledged it. I turned to walk toward the formal dining room, but a sharp elbow intentionally clipped my shoulder as I rounded the corner. Rachel stood blocking the hallway. She held a crystal wine glass in one hand and glared at me with an expression of supreme, unearned victory. She looked me up and down, sneering at my tailored charcoal blazer and sharp trousers. "Glad you decided to stop being stubborn," Rachel said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "Jamal has the settlement papers waiting in the study. You just need to walk in there, sign them without causing a pathetic scene, and maybe Liam will let you keep your car. You know he does not have to give you anything. You abandoned this marriage. You should be down on your knees thanking us for offering you a clean break." I brushed off the shoulder of my blazer exactly where Rachel had bumped me. My movements were slow and deliberate. I looked directly into her eyes, seeing the absolute arrogant delusion shining back at me. She genuinely believed I was a defeated woman crawling back to beg for scraps from the family table. She had no idea that her husband had wired stolen federal funds into a fake Delaware shell company just 48 hours ago. She had no idea she was currently standing in a house owned by my corporate trust. "I am not here to beg for anything, Rachel," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I brought the wine just like Liam asked. I am simply here to enjoy the holiday festivities with my family." Rachel scoffed and rolled her eyes. "You do not have a family, Sloane. You are just a temporary placeholder who failed to deliver. Now get into the dining room before Liam loses his patience." I walked past her, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. The formal dining room was a spectacular display of stolen luxury. The long mahogany table was covered in my fine china, my silver cutlery, and my crystal stemware. The entire family was already gathering around the spread. Jamal sat near the middle, sweating slightly despite the cool air conditioning, nervously checking his phone every few seconds. Patricia carried the turkey platter in and placed it proudly in the center of the table. Vanessa waddled in behind her, holding her lower back in a grossly exaggerated display of maternal burden. Liam stood proudly at the absolute head of the table. He wore a crisp, tailored suit, looking like the triumphant patriarch of a wealthy dynasty. He held a crystal champagne flute in his right hand. When he saw me enter the room, his chest puffed out. He offered me a patronizing, victorious smile. He thought his blackmail threat regarding the SEC had terrified me into submission. "Everyone take your seats," Liam commanded, gesturing to the heavy wooden chairs. The family quickly complied, leaving a single empty chair at the very opposite end of the long table. It was a deliberate insult, placing me as far away from the head of the family as physically possible. I walked slowly to the empty seat, but I did not sit down immediately. I stood behind the chair, watching the spectacle unfold. Liam raised his champagne flute and began tapping a silver spoon against the delicate crystal glass. The sharp ringing sound commanded the room's total attention. Jamal put his phone down. Patricia beamed with pride. Vanessa rested both hands protectively over her flat stomach. Before we eat, Liam announced, his voice projecting across the dining room with practiced theatricality. I want to make a special toast. This year has brought incredible changes and vital course corrections for this family. We have removed the toxic elements holding us back, and we have finally embraced our true potential. Liam turned his gaze directly toward Vanessa, his smile softening into an expression of absolute devotion. Most importantly, Liam continued, I want to make a toast to my beautiful Vanessa, who is carrying the true heir to the family legacy. To my son and to the bright, incredibly wealthy future we are going to build together. Patricia clapped her hands together in delight. Jamal raised his glass. Rachel cheered loudly, shooting a vicious, mocking glare in my direction. They were a chorus of enablers celebrating my supposed destruction. I pulled out the heavy wooden chair at the end of the table. The sound of the wood scraping against the floor cut right through their joyful applause. I sat down slowly, smoothing the fabric of my trousers. I folded my hands perfectly together and rested them on the polished mahogany surface. I looked straight down the length of the table, locking eyes with my arrogant, utterly clueless husband. Let us talk about that legacy, Liam, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a chilling, absolute authority that instantly paralyzed the entire room. The smiles vanished. Patricia lowered her hands. Jamal swallowed hard. Let us talk about the legacy of a man who is biologically incapable of producing an heir. I continued, my words slicing through the heavy silence like a scalpel. Let us talk about irreversible sterility. And while we are on the subject of building a wealthy future, Jamal, let us talk about the $500,000 you both stole from Apex Holdings to cover your illegal stock manipulation. Liam dropped his champagne flute. The expensive crystal shattered into 100 pieces across the hardwood floor. Shards of glass glittered across the hardwood floor. Liam stared down at his empty hand, his face draining of color. For a fraction of a second, absolute terror flashed in his eyes. But Liam had spent his life being shielded from reality by the enablers sitting at this very table. Denial was his primary survival mechanism. You are completely lying. Liam spat, his voice trembling before he forced it into a harsh sneer. You are delusional, Sloane. You are throwing out desperate lies because you know you have lost. You know I hold all the cards now. There is no wire fraud. That money was rightfully mine, an asset withdrawal authorized by my broker. And as for your other claim, Vanessa is pregnant. The proof is sitting right next to me. Jamal realized the power dynamic in the room was teetering. He needed to establish dominance immediately before I could elaborate on the Apex Holdings wire transfer. Jamal straightened his silk tie, plastered on a mask of corporate arrogance, and reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, legally bound document. Let us stop entertaining these hysterical fantasies, Jamal announced, his voice booming over the tension. He tossed the document onto the table and forcefully pushed it forward. The heavy packet slid across the mahogany, knocking against a silver gravy boat and coming to a halt directly in front of my folded hands. Here is the deal, Sloane, Jamal said, leaning forward and planting his knuckles on the table to loom over me. You sign over the deed to the trust, agree to $10,000 a month in alimony to Liam, and walk away quietly. If you do not, I will see to it that your credit is destroyed and your business is audited into the ground. My firm has connections at the IRS to ensure you spend the next decade drowning in tax litigation. Jamal smirked, believing he had delivered a checkmate. He thought the threat of a relentless government audit would shatter my resolve. He thought I was an intimidated woman who would surrender her financial empire to avoid a public scandal. Patricia seized the opportunity to join the attack. She set down her carving knife and wiped her hands on a linen napkin, looking at me with undisguised revulsion. She had never hidden her disdain for my ambition, but now surrounded by her victorious family, she let the social mask slip completely. You owe my son. Patricia scoffed, her voice echoing sharply against the dining room walls. You could not give him a child, you worked too much, and you lack the basic warmth of a woman. Vanessa is giving him a family. She is giving this legacy exactly what it deserves. You are just a cold, barren workaholic who failed at the only job that mattered. You need to sign those papers, pay my son for the prime years of his life that you wasted, and leave this house. Rachel nodded from her seat, raising her wine glass in a silent toast to her mother's vicious monologue. Vanessa sat up straighter, placing both hands proudly over her stomach, casting a sympathetic but mocking look in my direction. They were a unified front of entitlement, convinced that they had successfully cornered me in my own home. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer them the satisfaction of a defensive tear. I remained perfectly still, letting their insults hang in the air until the weight of their arrogance began to feel suffocating. I looked down at the thick, heavy contract resting on the table. The audacity of their demands was magnificent in its delusion. They were ordering me to finance their luxurious fantasies using the wealth they openly despised me for earning. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy packet of paper. I flipped through the first few pages, my eyes scanning the exorbitant terms. Liam wanted the house. He wanted the cars. He wanted a guaranteed monthly income that would allow him to maintain his expensive lifestyle without holding down a real job. He wanted me to subsidize his mistress and the unborn child he believed was his own. I glanced up at Liam. His chest was puffed out again, his confidence restored by Jamal and Patricia's unwavering support. He stood at the head of the table, radiating superiority. He believed he had won the war. I closed the contract. I held the stack of legal papers firmly in my right hand. Right in the center of the dining table, illuminating the Thanksgiving feast, sat a large, multi-wick centerpiece candle. Without breaking my intense eye contact with Liam, I extended my arm forward and deliberately dropped the entire settlement contract directly into the open flames. The thick parchment caught instantly. The roaring fire flared up brilliantly, consuming the absurd legal demands in a matter of seconds, filling the dining room with the sudden smell of burning paper and melting printer ink. "What the hell are you doing?" Jamal yelled, his arrogant composure snapping into frantic panic. He lunged forward across the massive table, desperately trying to swat the burning contract out of the flames, violently knocking over a crystal water pitcher in the process. I completely ignored his pathetic and desperate scrambling. I reached down into my structured designer tote bag, resting quietly by my feet. I bypassed my phone and wallet, my fingers closing tightly around the crisp white medical file I had brought specifically for this occasion. I pulled it out and slapped it loudly onto the mahogany surface. With a swift, precise motion, I slid the folder straight down the long table. It glided perfectly past the burning settlement papers, past the spilled water, and stopped directly on top of Liam's empty dinner plate. "I think you need to read page 2 before you claim that heir, Liam," I said, my voice echoing with icy, absolute finality. Liam stared at the crisp white medical file resting on top of his pristine porcelain dinner plate. The sudden shift in my demeanor had effectively drained the triumphant atmosphere from the dining room. The crackling sounds of the burning settlement contract in the center of the table provided a harsh soundtrack to his hesitation. His arrogant posture deflated slightly as he reached out with trembling fingers. Liam opens the file. His eyes scan the medical jargon. The color violently drains from his face. What is this?" Liam stammered, his voice cracking, as he looked up at me with wide, panicked eyes. He tried to push the folder away, as if it were coated in poison. "That is your official sterility diagnosis from 4 years ago, Liam," I said loudly, my voice cutting through the dining room. I made sure every single syllable carried the weight of absolute truth, the one you hid from me while you watched me inject myself with hormones for years. You held my hand in those sterile clinics. You watched me cry over negative test results. You let me believe my body was broken and failing our marriage, all while you knew with absolute medical certainty that you were the one entirely incapable of fathering a child. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. The crackling of the burning paper in the centerpiece finally died down, leaving nothing but the smell of smoke and ruined schemes. Liam opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked desperately toward his mother, seeking the unearned protection she had provided his entire life. Jamal leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his sweating forehead, his legal mind quickly calculating the disastrous implications of this revelation. If Liam was biologically sterile, the entire premise of his divorce demand regarding providing for his heir was a fraudulent sham. Vanessa drops her fork. It clattered loudly against her plate, shattering the quiet. Her hands immediately flew from her stomach to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between Liam and the medical file. Patricia slammed her hands down on the mahogany table, pushing herself up from her chair. Her face was flushed with fierce defensive rage. Patricia gasps. Sterile. That is a lie. Vanessa is 4 months pregnant. We have seen the ultrasound images. We have heard the heartbeat. My son is going to be a father. I slowly turned my attention away from Liam's pale, defeated face and locked my gaze directly onto Vanessa. She shrank back into her chair, pressing herself against the heavy wooden backing as if trying to merge with the furniture. The color had left her face too, leaving her looking sickly and trapped. Sloane turns to Vanessa with a lethal smile. "She certainly is," I replied, offering absolutely no mercy. "But not by Liam." Vanessa gasped, shaking her head frantically. She looked at Liam, reaching out a trembling hand to touch his arm. "Liam, do not listen to her. She is crazy. She is just trying to tear us apart." I ignored her pathetic display and kept my voice perfectly measured. "Care to tell the table about your 23-year-old personal trainer, Troy? Or should I show them the ultrasound bills he has been paying directly from his own checking account for the past 4 months?" The entire room seemed to gasp in unison. Liam jerked his arm away from Vanessa's touch, as if her skin burned him. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and absolute horror. "What is she talking about?" Vanessa, Liam demanded, his voice rising to a frantic shout. "Who is Troy?" Vanessa burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "Liam, it was just one mistake," she sobbed, her voice muffled by her fingers. "I was so lonely when you were working. He just listened to me. I did not mean for this to happen." Liam stumbled backward, knocking his heavy wooden chair to the floor with a loud crash. He grabbed his hair, pacing the length of the room like a caged animal. "You told me it was mine," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at her stomach. "You made me buy you that necklace today. You made me demand this house. You made me destroy my marriage for another man's child." Rachel sat completely frozen in her seat, her wine glass suspended halfway to her mouth. The smug superiority she had displayed in the hallway was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, uncomfortable shock. She looked at her brother, then at Vanessa, and finally at me, realizing the absolute magnitude of the trap they had all willingly walked into. Jamal stood up slowly, his face tight with furious realization. He looked at Liam, then turned his dark gaze toward Vanessa. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" Jamal snarled, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I committed federal wire fraud today. I stole $500,000 from Apex Holdings to cover my margin calls because Liam promised me the equity in this estate would cover the tracks. We leveraged everything on a fake pregnancy and a fraudulent divorce settlement." I watched the realization of their total destruction wash over the room. The grand suburban estate, the luxury cars parked outside, the expensive clothes, and the arrogant demands were all built on a foundation of spectacular lies. They had conspired to steal my wealth, humiliate me, and discard me, relying entirely on the illusion of family loyalty and Liam's inherent superiority. Now that illusion was shattered, Liam was confronted with the undeniable reality of his own medical shortcomings and his mistress's infidelity. Vanessa's meal ticket had just evaporated, leaving her exposed and defenseless. Jamal was staring down the barrel of a lengthy federal prison sentence for financial crimes he could never possibly cover up. And Patricia, the domineering matriarch who orchestrated this hostile takeover, watched her golden child's life collapse in real time. Liam stared at the second page of the medical file, his eyes darting across the black and white text. The official letterhead from his own urologist glowed under the chandelier, confirming the permanent sterility diagnosis he had received 4 years ago. The paper trembled violently in his grip. The arrogant posture he had held just moments ago collapsed, replaced by raw, primal devastation. He looked from the medical proof in his hands to Vanessa, who was shrinking back into her chair, her hands clutching her silk dress. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the burning settlement contract. Then the silence shattered. Liam let out a guttural scream, completely devoid of his usual polished restraint. He threw the medical file across the room, the papers scattering like snow over the Persian rug. He grabbed the edge of his mahogany dining chair and violently hurled it backward. The chair crashed against the hardwood floor with a deafening thud, splintering one of the carved legs. He lunged toward Vanessa, his face contorted in absolute rage. "You lied to me!" Liam screamed, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff collar. "You looked me right in the eyes and said it was a miracle." Vanessa scrambled backward, her chair tipping over as she tried to put distance between herself and the furious man bearing down on her. She backed up against the floral wallpaper, her initial shock giving way to genuine fear, which immediately morphed into vicious, cornered malice. The fragile victim persona she had weaponized against me completely evaporated. Her sobbing stopped, replaced by a harsh, defensive snarl. Her face, streaked with ruined makeup, twisted into an ugly mask of pure contempt. "You are an easy mark," Vanessa screamed right back at him, her voice shrill and grating. "You wanted to be a daddy so bad you did not even question the math. You were so desperate to prove you were a real man that you completely ignored reality. Troy gave me what you never could, Liam. You think I wanted to be trapped in this boring suburban nightmare with a man who needs a pill to perform. You bought every lie because your ego demanded it. You are a pathetic fool who paid for another man to build a family." Her words struck Liam like physical blows. He recoiled, his hands clenching into tight fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The illusion of his masculine triumph was annihilated, butchered by the very woman he had flaunted as his ultimate prize. Patricia shrieked, the sound cutting through the room like breaking glass. The domineering matriarch rushed forward to intervene. She abandoned her position at the head of the table, her silk blouse catching on the edge of the turkey platter. She threw herself between Liam and Vanessa, physically pushing her son back by his chest. "Stop it!" Patricia cried out, her hair falling loose around her panicked face. "Do not let her provoke you, Liam. She is nothing but trash. Look at what she has done to this family." Rachel stood paralyzed near the sideboard, her hands clamped over her ears. The smug superiority she had worn in the hallway was gone, replaced by frantic terror as her structured world imploded. "Stop screaming!" Rachel yelled, her voice bordering on hysteria. "Everyone just calm down. We need to handle this. What if someone hears us? They are going to call the police." The pristine Thanksgiving dinner was a disaster. The overturned chairs, shattered crystal-burning settlement papers, and scattering of medical records painted a picture of absolute devastation. The family that had spent years mocking my independence was now physically tearing each other apart. Jamal recognized that the situation had completely spiraled out of control. The family dynamic he had manipulated to secure his own financial salvation was currently destroying itself on the dining room floor. He needed to assert dominance to redirect the blinding rage away from his own failures and back toward the easy target. He aggressively stepped over the broken crystal, his heavy shoes crunching on the glass. He pointed a rigid, trembling finger directly at my face. His corporate composure was shattered, exposing the desperate cornered rat underneath. "You vindictive psycho!" Jamal shouted, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "You planned this entire sick spectacle just to humiliate us. You broke into this house with stolen medical records to destroy a family. I am not playing your twisted games anymore, Sloane. I am calling the police right now to have you arrested for trespassing. You have no legal right to be on this property, and I will ensure you are dragged out of here in handcuffs." He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulling out his smartphone and holding it up as if it were a weapon ready to dial emergency services. I remained seated at the end of the table, perfectly still amidst the wreckage. I did not flinch at his threat. I did not raise my voice to match his screaming. The chaotic energy swirling around the room washed over me, ineffective, against the truth I had brought. I watched Jamal's trembling hand holding the phone, recognizing his hollow intimidation tactic. I reached down into my structured designer tote bag for the second time. My fingers bypassed my wallet and closed firmly around a thick manila folder. I pulled it out and set it down on the polished mahogany table next to the smoldering remains of their absurd alimony demands. I looked directly into Jamal's panicked eyes, letting a slow, lethal smile spread across my face. "Please do, Jamal," I said, my voice projecting crystal-clear authority across the ruined dining room. "Call them immediately. But while we wait for the cops to arrive and discuss my legal ownership of this estate, let us talk about the $500,000 wire fraud you committed last Tuesday, using Apex Holdings corporate credentials to cover your disastrous margin calls." Jamal froze. His hand hovered an inch above the glowing screen of his expensive smartphone. The arrogant threat of calling the authorities died instantly in his throat. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow under the dining room chandelier. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. The silence stretched thick and suffocating, broken only by the ragged breathing of his brother on the floor. I watched the absolute terror take root in Jamal. I watched the exact moment his towering corporate superiority shattered into pieces. "I do not know what you are talking about," Jamal stammered. His voice was entirely stripped of its previous booming authority. It was a weak, pathetic sound. "I do not know what you are talking about." He repeated the lie, desperately trying to convince himself more than anyone else in the room. He slowly lowered his phone and placed it face down on the mahogany table. His hands were shaking so violently that the device rattled against the wood. "You are making wild accusations, Sloane. You are just throwing around financial terms to confuse my mother and Rachel." I did not break eye contact. I reached back into my structured designer tote bag for the third and final time. My fingers traced the smooth, glossy surface of the printed document I had prepared. I pulled it out. It was a single sheet of paper carrying the undeniable weight of federal evidence. I held it up for the entire room to see. The bold black ink detailed every damning piece of the transaction. I tossed the printed wire transfer receipt directly onto the center of the table. It fluttered through the air and landed squarely on top of the ruined, half-carved roasted turkey Patricia had proudly presented just 20 minutes ago. The grease from the meat immediately began to stain the edges of the paper, but the transaction numbers remained perfectly, glaringly legible. "You and Liam forged my signature to secure a loan from Vanguard Capital," I said, my voice echoing off the walls with terrifying calm. "You bypassed standard compliance protocols. You bypassed the secondary verification checks. You used my personal credentials to authorize a $500,000 asset transfer to save your own failing investments." Jamal stared at the greasy receipt resting on the turkey. He looked at the shattered crystals scattered across the floor. He looked at his brother, who was still clutching his head tightly in the dark corner of the room. A strange transformation overtook Jamal. The panic suddenly vanished, replaced by a cold, desperate, sneering arrogance. He straightened his posture meticulously, adjusting the expensive lapels of his tailored suit jacket. He was a cornered animal, choosing to bare its teeth. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that completely lacked any genuine humor. He looked down his nose at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious defiance. "So what?" Jamal spat, slamming his palms flat against the table. "So what if we did? You think you have me trapped, Sloane? You think you are some kind of master strategist? Vanguard is a massive, faceless corporation. They manage trillions of dollars in assets. They do not care about a minor signature discrepancy. They do not care about internal family financial maneuvers. As long as the interest gets paid, they will never look twice at that account. They are a machine, not a moral authority. You are banking on a corporation to fight your battles for you. And even if you tried to raise a red flag, you cannot prove we forged it anyway. It was processed through a secure terminal. It is your word against ours. We are a unified family. You are a discarded outsider. Who do you think the investigators are going to believe? Jamal was breathless, riding the high of his own manufactured confidence. He genuinely believed his status would shield him from the consequences of his actions. He believed his family name was an impenetrable armor against any legal repercussions. He believed he could outsmart the financial system because he had always been taught the system was built for men exactly like him. Men who took what they wanted without a second thought. Men who stepped on anyone in their path without hesitation. Men who felt entitled to everything they touched. Men who never ever paid the price for their infinite greed. Rachel let out a loud breath of relief, clutching her wine glass tightly to her chest. The tension in her shoulders visibly dissolved. Patricia nodded fiercely. Her eyes locked proudly on her oldest son, genuinely believing his arrogant defense was absolute gospel. They thought they had survived the storm. They thought the worst was over. They thought they had finally defeated me. I placed both of my hands flat on the polished mahogany table. I pushed my chair back slowly, the wood scraping loudly against the floorboards. I stood up to my full height. I reached down and methodically buttoned the center button of my tailored charcoal blazer. Every movement was precise. Every movement was deliberate. I looked around the room, making sure I had the absolute, undivided attention of every single person who had spent the last 7 years treating me like an inferior servant. I looked down at Jamal. His smug smile was firmly fixed in place, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality about to crush him. I do not need to prove it to Vanguard, Jamal. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that demanded total silence. I do not need to call their fraud department. I do not need to alert their compliance officers. Because Vanguard Capital is a subsidiary of Apex Holdings, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. The color vanished from his face instantly. The room spun. You did not steal from a massive, faceless corporation, Jamal. You made a fatal miscalculation. You stole directly from me. Jamal froze, his hand hovering over his phone. I don't know what you're talking about. The arrogant facade that had defined his entire existence shattered into pure terror. His mouth opened and closed silently, struggling to form a coherent response to the absolute catastrophe I had just unleashed. The color completely drained from his face, leaving a sickly, ashen gray behind. He slowly lowered his arm, the phone slipping from his loose grip and clattering onto the hardwood floor. He did not even flinch at the sound. His eyes remained locked on me, wide and dilated, finally registering the magnitude of his fatal error. He had not merely skimmed funds from a faceless corporate entity. He had wired $500,000 directly into a trap I had meticulously set for him. Rachel snapped her head toward her husband, her wine glass sloshing burgundy liquid onto her expensive silk blouse. She ignored the stain. She stared at Jamal's paralyzed, terrified expression, and the reality of his guilt hit her like a physical blow. She lunged forward, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into the fine wool of his suit jacket. Rachel grabs Jamal's arm, her voice rising in a frantic, high-pitched shriek. What does she mean? What did you do? Jamal, look at me and tell me what she means. Jamal could not look at her. He could not look at anyone. His gaze remained fixed on the ruined turkey, where Sloane tosses a printed wire transfer receipt onto the ruined turkey. You and Liam forged my signature to secure a loan from Vanguard Capital. I stepped away from my chair at the end of the table. The sharp click of my heels against the floorboards cut through the sudden, suffocating silence of the room. I began to walk. Sloane circles the table like a shark. I moved with slow, deliberate precision, savoring the absolute control I now wielded over the people who had spent an hour trying to destroy me. I trailed my hand lightly along the edge of the mahogany table, passing behind Patricia, who sat rigidly in her chair, her breath catching in her throat. 2 years ago, Jamal, you convinced Liam to steal money from his law firm's escrow accounts to feed your illegal insider trading ring. I stated, my voice echoing with lethal clarity. I paused right behind Jamal, leaning in close enough for him to hear the fabric of my blazer brush against his chair. You hit a bad streak. Your inside sources dried up. Your margin calls came due and you panicked. You dragged your own brother into a felony to cover your massive losses. You made him raid client funds, promising you would return the cash before the quarterly audit. I found out. Instead of divorcing him, then I bought your debts. I own the paper on your cars, your firm, and your freedom. Patricia let out a strangled gasp, pressing her hands to her chest. She looked frantically at Liam, who was violently avoiding her gaze, staring fixedly at the shattered crystal near his feet. The golden child, the perfect lawyer, had embezzled client money for his crooked brother. The sheer scale of my deception finally washed over the room. They had spent years mocking my career, treating my business as a cute little hobby, while elevating Liam and Jamal as titans of industry. They had no idea I had been their silent landlord, their ultimate creditor, holding the keys to their gilded cages, waiting for the perfect moment to lock them inside. But Jamal was a narcissist, and his ego violently rejected the reality of his defeat. He blinked hard, his breathing ragged, and then Jamal regains his smug arrogance. He straightened his posture, meticulously adjusting the expensive lapels of his tailored suit jacket. He was a cornered animal, choosing to bare its teeth. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that completely lacked any genuine humor. He looked down his nose at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious defiance. "So what?" Jamal spat, slamming his palms flat against the table. "Vanguard is a faceless megacorp. They don't care as long as the interest gets paid. You can't prove we forged it anyway." He gestured wildly. "It was processed through a secure terminal. It is your word against ours. We are a unified family. You are a discarded outsider. Who do you think the investigators are going to believe? You have absolutely nothing but a piece of paper with numbers." Suddenly, Liam scrambled up from the floor. He kicked the broken pieces of his chair out of the way, his face flushed with a desperate, manic energy. He was sweating profusely, his expensive dress shirt clinging to his skin. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged defiance. He believed he had found the ultimate loophole to save himself from the absolute ruin I had just laid out. Liam, sweating profusely, screams, "You can't do this! I am your husband. Under state law, half of Apex Holdings belongs to me." His chest heaved as he gasped for air. "Whatever you built during this marriage is marital property. You cannot use those debts against me because I own half of everything you have. I am entitled to half of that entire company." I stood perfectly still at the head of the table. Sloane stands up, buttoning her blazer. I looked at his desperate face, at the raw greed in his eyes. "I don't need to prove it to Vanguard, Jamal, because Vanguard Capital is a subsidiary of Apex Holdings, and I am the founder and CEO of Apex Holdings. You didn't steal from a faceless megacorp. You stole directly from me." Sloane laughs, a chilling sound. It started low, a dark, genuine amusement bubbling up from my chest, echoing off the mahogany walls. "You clearly never read the prenup you forced me to sign 10 years ago when you thought you were the rich one." Liam stumbled back against the heavy mahogany sideboard. The crystal decanters rattled dangerously behind him. His hands shook with such violent tremors that he dropped his phone twice before managing to unlock the screen. He frantically swiped at the glass display, his thumb slipping on the smooth surface as he searched for his attorney's contact information. He was hyperventilating now, the polished facade of the successful corporate lawyer completely dissolved into the panicked flailing of a terrified boy. "You cannot do this!" Liam shouted again, pressing the phone to his ear and pacing the length of the ruined dining room. His voice was shrill, completely devoid of its usual patronizing baritone. "The law is the law, Sloane. We are married. Half of that company is mine. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. I will bleed your corporate accounts dry before I let you walk away with my money." "Pick up the phone," he muttered desperately into the receiver, slamming his free hand against the wall. "Pick up the phone right now." I remained standing at the head of the table. I smoothed the lapel of my blazer, watching him unravel. I did not need to raise my voice to destroy him. My calm demeanor was the ultimate weapon against his chaotic breakdown. Section 4, paragraph B. I recited, my voice slicing through the heavy, smoky air of the dining room with absolute precision. Any corporate entities founded solely by Party A remain the exclusive, non-divisible property of Party A, regardless of marital status, shared assets, or future valuation. Liam froze immediately. The phone slipped slowly from his ear, hanging limply at his side. The automated voicemail message from his lawyer echoed faintly into the quiet room. "You wrote it yourself, Liam," I continued, stepping slowly around the edge of the long table. The sharp click of my heels against the hardwood floor sounded like a ticking clock. "You drafted that entire prenuptial agreement 10 years ago. You were so incredibly desperate to protect your precious family trust fund from the struggling woman you were marrying. You wanted to make absolutely certain that if I ever left you, I would walk away with absolutely nothing. You were entirely convinced I would spend my entire life as a mid-level employee, fetching your dry cleaning and hosting your corporate dinners. You never imagined I would build a billion-dollar financial empire while you were busy playing golf and funding your brother's illegal stock market gambling. You dug your own grave." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Jamal stared blankly at the floor, the reality of federal prison looming over him. Rachel stood frozen, her wine-stained blouse clinging to her chest, her mind entirely incapable of processing the absolute destruction of her family's wealth. Vanessa was still cowering in the corner, clutching her stomach, entirely forgotten by the men who had promised her a life of luxury. Then the dynamic in the room violently shifted again. Patricia had been watching her son collapse. She had watched the golden boy, the heir to the family legacy, get systematically dismantled by his own legal arrogance. The matriarch of the family, who had spent the last decade treating me like a disposable accessory, suddenly realized that I held the absolute power to erase her bloodline from the map. Her hostility vanished, replaced by a grotesque manufactured desperation. Patricia rushed forward. Her silk blouse snagged on the edge of a shattered wine glass, but she did not care. She practically threw herself across the dining room, closing the distance between us with frantic speed. Before I could step back, she reached out and grabbed both of my hands. Her grip was painfully tight, her manicured nails digging sharply into my skin. Her rings dug into my knuckles. "Sloane, please!" Patricia cried out, her voice cracking with forced emotion. Her eyes were wide, brimming with sudden theatrical tears. "You cannot do this. We are family. We have always been a family. Please just stop for a minute and think about what you are doing. We can fix this quietly. We do not need to involve the authorities or the federal investigators. We can sit down like civilized people and negotiate a private settlement. Jamal made a terrible mistake, but he is a good boy. Liam was just confused and led astray by that awful woman in the corner. Do not destroy my boy, Sloane. I am begging you. I will do whatever you want. I will make them apologize. Just please do not take everything away from us." I stared down at the desperate woman clutching my hands. This was the same woman who barely 30 minutes ago had mocked my infertility. This was the same woman who had openly celebrated my replacement. This was the same woman who had commanded me to sign away my life and crawl out the front door. Her hypocrisy was physically repulsive. I did not offer her a polite smile. I did not offer her sympathy. I violently yanked my hands away from her grip. I pulled back with such force that Patricia stumbled forward, her heavy pearl necklace swinging wildly against her chest. She gasped, shocked by the physical rejection. "You told me a good wife sacrifices Patricia," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "You spent 10 years lecturing me about duty and submission. You told me it was my job to endure the disrespect, the lies, and the absolute humiliation to protect the sacred image of this family. Well, I finally listened to your advice. Today, my sacrifice is excising the cancer from my life." Before Patricia could formulate a response, a sound echoed through the grand foyer. It was not a polite ring of the doorbell. It was heavy, rhythmic knocking pounding violently against the thick oak wood of the front door. "And right on time," I softly murmured. The heavy rhythmic knocking pounded against the thick oak wood of the front door again, shaking the brass hinges. Before anyone in the dining room could even process the sound, the heavy double doors were violently breached. They burst open with a deafening crack that echoed through the vaulted ceilings of the grand foyer. The cold November air rushed inside, carrying with it the undeniable presence of federal authority. 6 FBI agents clad in dark tactical windbreakers with striking yellow lettering across their backs stormed into the hallway. Their boots hit the polished hardwood floor with unified military precision. They fanned out instantly, securing the perimeter of the estate with terrifying efficiency. Right behind the wedge of tactical jackets walked Pierce, my lead corporate attorney, holding a thick leather briefcase and wearing a perfectly neutral expression. He caught my eye across the ruined dining room and offered a single crisp nod of confirmation. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe buzz cut and zero tolerance for suburban melodrama, stepped directly into the arched threshold of the dining room. His sharp gaze swept over the shattered crystal, the smoldering remains of the settlement papers, and the horrified faces of my former family. "Liam and Jamal," the lead agent barked, his voice vibrating with absolute command. "Show me your hands immediately." For a fraction of a second, the entire room was frozen in a grotesque tableau. Patricia stood paralyzed, her hands still suspended in the air where I had yanked mine away. Liam remained glued to the spot next to the mahogany sideboard, his mouth hanging open in silent shock. But Jamal possessed a survival instinct that violently overrode his frozen terror. He chose flight. Jamal let out a strangled gasp, spun on his heel, and sprinted toward the floor to ceiling glass patio doors at the back of the room. He scrambled frantically, his expensive leather dress shoes slipping dangerously on the smooth hardwood floor. He was desperately trying to reach the sprawling manicured backyard to escape into the dark woods beyond the property line. He did not make it past the head of the table. Before Jamal could even touch the brass handle of the patio door, one of the federal agents launched himself forward with explosive speed. The agent closed the distance in 3 massive strides and tackled Jamal bodily from the side. The sheer force of the impact lifted Jamal entirely off the ground. The 2 men crashed violently onto the center of the formal dining room table. The heavy mahogany groaned under their combined weight. Fine bone china plates shattered into 1,000 jagged porcelain shards. The silver gravy boat tipped over, sending a thick brown river flooding across the pristine white linen tablecloth. Tall crystal wine glasses snapped at their stems, sending dark red wine splashing across Jamal's tailored suit and onto the floor like fresh blood. The roasted turkey, already desecrated by my printed wire receipt, was crushed completely flat beneath Jamal's flailing shoulder. Jamal thrashed wildly against the wood, gasping for air, but the agent swiftly pinned his arms behind his back, pressing his face roughly into the spilled wine and broken china. While Jamal violently resisted reality, his younger brother utterly surrendered to it. The exact moment the agent tackled Jamal onto the table, Liam's legs simply gave out beneath him. The golden boy of the family, the arrogant corporate lawyer who had spent the last hour demanding half of my empire, collapsed. He fell heavily to his knees, directly onto the scattered debris of his broken chair. He did not try to run. He did not try to argue the law. He simply laced his trembling fingers together, placed his hands flat on top of his head, and began to sob uncontrollably. The sound was pathetic, a high-pitched, wretched wailing that tore from his chest. He rocked back and forth on his knees, squeezing his eyes shut, trying to block out the sight of the tactical windbreakers and the sound of his brother being handcuffed on top of the ruined Thanksgiving feast. The illusion of Liam's invincible superiority was entirely annihilated, reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating mess on the floor. The lead agent ignored the chaos of the shattered table and the sobbing man on the floor. He stepped forward, pulled a laminated card from his tactical vest, and projected his voice over the noise. The lead agent reads them their rights, stating loudly, You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and insider trading." The heavy metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut around Jamal's wrists echoed sharply. That sound was the trigger that finally snapped Rachel's mind. The sight of her husband pinned to the table covered in grease and wine broke her completely. Rachel is screaming, hitting the agents. She lunged forward, her high heels snapping against the floorboards. She threw herself toward the agent holding Jamal down. "You cannot take him!" she shrieked, blindly attacking his tactical vest with her clenched fists. "He did not do anything wrong. Sloane is lying about everything. Get your hands off my husband right now." Two other agents immediately stepped in, grabbing Rachel by her upper arms and pulling her backward. She thrashed wildly in their grip, her manicured nails scratching at their sleeves. The dining room was a scene of absolute devastation. Jamal was hauled forcefully to his feet, his hands locked behind his back. Liam remained on his knees, weeping loudly, utterly defeated. Patricia stood trembling by the sideboard, entirely unable to watch the violent dismantling of her legacy. The lead agent surveyed the secured room. He took note of the crying men and the hysterical woman pinned firmly against the floral wallpaper before he saw me standing tall amidst the shattered glass and broken furniture, savoring the finality of my victory. The agent turns to Sloane. "Are these two women residents of this property?" Sloane smiles. "No, they are trespassers, and I want them removed." The lead FBI agent stepped aside for the local authorities. The heavy tread of dark boots announced the arrival of the county sheriff. He was a broad, weathered man with a thick gray mustache and an impassive expression. He walked into the dining room, his boots crunching loudly on the broken crystal and smashed porcelain that littered the floor. He surveyed the wreckage of the Thanksgiving dinner, the handcuffed brothers, and finally turned his attention to the two women cowering against the wallpaper. Patricia and Vanessa stared at him with wide, uncomprehending eyes. They had spent their entire lives treating law enforcement as a private security force meant to protect their wealth. Now the badge was pointing directly at them. The local sheriff, stepping in directly behind the federal FBI agents, addressed Vanessa and Patricia. "Ladies, the property owner has revoked your permission to be here," the sheriff announced, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "You are trespassing on private property. Vacate the premises immediately." The absolute finality in the sheriff's voice struck Vanessa like a physical blow. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her. The luxurious suburban life she thought she had stolen from me was evaporating into thin air. The rich husband she had secured was having his rights read to him while pressed against a ruined turkey. And the magnificent estate she had planned to redecorate tomorrow was aggressively rejecting her presence. Panic seized her. She stumbled forward, her silk dress clinging to her trembling frame. She dramatically placed both hands protectively over her slightly rounded stomach, playing the only card she had left in her pathetic deck. "I am pregnant!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the chaotic room. "You cannot do this! You cannot throw a pregnant woman out into the snow!" She looked frantically from the sheriff to the federal agents, waiting for someone to pity her, waiting for the patriarchal chivalry she had always manipulated to save her. But the room remained entirely indifferent to her performance. The sheriff did not soften his stance. He simply looked at her with cold professional detachment. He tilted his head toward the front door, where the freezing November wind was howling. "I can and I am," the sheriff replied flatly. "Grab a coat." The rejection sent Vanessa into a hysterical spiral, but she scrambled backward, frantically searching for her purse among the debris. Patricia, however, refused to accept this monumental humiliation. The matriarch of the family drew herself up to her full height, her face flushed with a furious crimson. Her pearl necklace shook against her chest as she pointed an accusing finger at the sheriff. "You will do no such thing," Patricia commanded desperately, trying to summon the authority that usually made service workers tremble. "I am Patricia Blackwell. I demand to speak to your superior immediately. I am not leaving this house without my belongings. My designer bags are upstairs in the master suite. I have thousands of dollars in jewelry in the guest room safe. I will not be rushed out of here like a common criminal." The sheriff sighed, a heavy sound that communicated his absolute zero tolerance for wealthy entitlement. He gave a sharp nod to the two deputies flanking him. The deputies stepped forward instantly. They did not ask politely. They did not negotiate. They grabbed Patricia firmly by the elbows, their strong grips digging into her silk blouse. "How dare you touch me!" Patricia screamed, her voice breaking into a hoarse screech. "Unhand me this instant!" But her protests were entirely useless. The deputies marched her forcefully toward the grand foyer, their boots moving in unison as she dragged her feet against the floorboards. Vanessa followed closely behind, sobbing loudly, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The heavy front doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the sound of Patricia's screaming demands. The dining room suddenly felt vast and hollow, stripped of the women who had tormented me for years. The agents hauled Jamal back up forcefully, shoving him toward the exit. Jamal did not look at me. His arrogant head was bowed, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, the reality of his destroyed empire crushing him into silence. Then two agents hauled Liam up from the floor. They jerked his arms up, testing the tension of the steel cuffs. Liam was a pathetic sight. His custom suit was wrinkled and stained with wine. His face was blotchy, streaked with sweat and tears. His carefully maintained corporate persona was gone, leaving only the weak, greedy man I had finally unmasked. As the agents dragged him past the table, he stopped. He dug his heels into the floor, fighting the forward momentum just enough to turn his head and look directly at me. His eyes were red, burning with absolute venom. "You planned this from the start," Liam hissed, his voice trembling with sheer hatred. "You sat there for years playing the dutiful wife while you plotted to destroy us. You are a monster." I did not flinch at his insult. I offered no defensive justification. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was standing just inches away from his sweating face. The agents paused for a fraction of a second, allowing the confrontation. I looked deep into his panicked eyes, seeing the exact reflection of the man who had lied, cheated, and attempted to steal my entire future. I leaned in close to his ear, ensuring my voice would be the last thing he heard before leaving the house he had tried to claim as his own. "I am just a reflection of what you made me, Liam." I whispered my words sharp against his skin. "Enjoy federal prison." I stepped back, smoothing the lapel of my tailored blazer. The agents jerked him forward, dragging his sobbing frame down the hallway and out into the freezing night. The heavy front wooden doors finally clicked shut, plunging the great house into a profound, victorious silence. I stepped out onto the grand front porch. Thick snowflakes swirled in the harsh strobe lights of the federal vehicles idling in my driveway. Below me, justice executed its final maneuvers. Federal agents shoved Jamal roughly into the back of a black armored SUV. He looked small now. A few yards away, another pair marched Liam toward a second vehicle. His head hung low, trembling against the freezing wind. The heavy metal door slammed shut, sealing his fate behind tinted glass. The convoy rolled smoothly down the long driveway, leaving a trail of flashing lights fading into the dark woods. Down at the end of the driveway, near the stone entrance gates, stood the remnants of my former nightmare. Patricia, Rachel, and Vanessa huddled together in the freezing cold. Their thin silk blouses and high heels provided zero protection against the sudden winter storm. Rachel stared longingly at her pristine white luxury SUV, parked just outside the gate. She took a step toward it, seeking shelter from the biting wind, but a massive yellow tow truck reversed out of the darkness, blocking her path entirely. A burly driver hopped out, thick metal chains clanging as he moved straight toward Rachel's bumper. "Hey, Rachel!" screamed, her voice cracking with indignation as she marched toward the driver. "What are you doing? Get away from my car! You cannot touch that!" The driver did not even pause his work. He dragged the heavy chains beneath the front chassis and hooked them securely. He pulled a battered clipboard from under his arm and held it up, unbothered by her screaming. Vehicle was listed as collateral on a defaulted commercial loan from Vanguard Capital. The driver stated loudly, his voice carrying over the wind. "I am repossessing it. Step back." Rachel let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. Vanguard Capital was the shell entity I had established to silently buy up Jamal's toxic debts when his firm first began to hemorrhage cash. I had personally authorized that specific loan, knowing exactly what assets he had leveraged to secure it. Rachel lunged forward, grabbing the driver's sleeve, but a deputy stepped between them. The hydraulic lift whined loudly, raising the front end of the luxury SUV into the air. Rachel watched in absolute horror as her final piece of status, her last shield against the real world, was unceremoniously hauled away into the snowy night. The reality of their utter destitution settled over the three women. They stood on the edge of the asphalt snowflakes, clinging to their hair, shivering violently. Patricia looked up the driveway, her eyes locking onto mine where I stood on the elevated porch. Her previous outrage had completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked panic. She took a few hesitant steps up the driveway, her thin designer cardigan offering no warmth. Her teeth were now visibly chattering. "Sloane, please," Patricia begged, cupping her hands around her mouth so her voice would reach me. "Call us an Uber, please. My phone is inside. We are freezing. You cannot just leave us out here in the snow." I looked down at them from the top of the stone steps. I quietly studied the shivering matriarch, who had spent a decade treating me like a stepping stone for her son, the sister-in-law who had mocked my business acumen, and the mistress who thought she could effortlessly steal my life. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. The cold they felt right now was nothing compared to the ice they had forced me to live in for 10 years. "I think a brisk walk will build character," I called back, my voice ringing out clear and sharp. "Happy Thanksgiving." I turned my back on them, walked inside, and slammed the massive oak double doors shut. I threw the heavy brass deadbolt, the loud click echoing with supreme finality. Inside the grand foyer was perfectly quiet for the first time in months. The suffocating tension that had haunted this house, the constant walking on eggshells, the endless stream of lies, it was all gone. I walked slowly back into the dining room. The space was a disaster zone. The broken crystal, the crushed turkey, the wine-stained tablecloth, the overturned chairs. It was a truly chaotic mess, but to me it looked like an absolute masterpiece. It was a monument to my survival. Pierce walked up quietly beside me. He reached out, handing me a heavy crystal tumbler filled with vintage bourbon. He clinked his own glass against mine, the chime ringing brightly in the ruined room. "The Securities and Exchange Commission freeze on Jamal's firm goes into effect." At midnight, Pierce confirmed, his tone professional, but deeply satisfied. "Their accounts are locked, and the divorce proceedings will be expedited through a federal judge due to the severity of the criminal fraud charges. Liam will have zero leverage." I took a slow, deep, burning sip of the dark bourbon. The warmth spread through my chest. The years of systematic gaslighting, of being told I was constantly overreacting, of being told I was less than them, of being manipulated into physical and mental exhaustion, finally washed away. The heavy armor I had worn for 10 years fell to the floor. I was completely free. I owned everything, and they had absolutely nothing. I walked over to the grand marble fireplace. The flames were still roaring, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. I reached up and picked up the heavy silver-framed wedding photo of Liam and me that Patricia had proudly displayed on the mantel just an hour ago. I stared at the image of the naive girl in the white dress and the liar standing next to her. Without a single word, I dropped the frame directly into the roaring fire. The flames licked greedily at the silver edges. I stood there silently, sipping my cold bourbon, watching the glass crack and the image melt into ash. 6 months later, the freezing snowstorm that swallowed the Blackwell family was nothing more than a distant, pleasant memory. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my penthouse office, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished concrete floor. The skyline of the city stretched out behind me, a sprawling kingdom of steel and glass that I now practically owned. I stood at the head of a massive custom-built marble boardroom table. The surface was immaculate, entirely devoid of the shattered crystal and spilled wine that had defined my last family gathering. Instead, it was lined with sleek tablets, glowing financial projections, and the top executive officers of my empire. They sat in absolute reverent silence, their eyes fixed firmly on me. I smoothed my tailored navy suit, feeling the heavy weight of absolute control. The room was electric with anticipation. We were not discussing profit margins today. We were finalizing a new multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would cement my company as the undisputed titan of the global financial sector. I gestured toward the digital display glowing on the far wall. The intricate charts detailed the aggressive hostile takeover of our largest international competitor. I outlined the strategy with cold mathematical precision. Every legal loophole had been successfully exploited. Every structural weakness in their corporate hierarchy had been identified and brutally leveraged. I spoke without notes, my voice projecting authority and unwavering confidence. There was no hesitation, no performance of the dutiful, quiet wife I had played for a decade. The men and women in the room hung on my every word, furiously taking notes. They did not see the woman who had spent years fetching dry cleaning and enduring the patronizing sneers of Patricia. They saw a predator at the absolute apex of the corporate food chain. I broke down the restructuring protocol, detailing exactly how we would absorb their assets and liquidate their redundancies. It was a beautiful, flawless execution of corporate warfare. The sheer scale of the wealth we were generating was staggering. I walked slowly around the edge of the marble table, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. It was a rhythmic sound that commanded total submission from the entire room. As I reached the midpoint of the acquisition timeline, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Pierce walked in. He moved with his usual quiet efficiency, carrying a sleek leather folder. He did not interrupt the flow of the meeting. He simply glided up behind my right shoulder, waiting for a natural pause in my presentation. I finished my breakdown of the third quarter projected yields and turned my head slightly toward him. Pierce leaned over with an update, bringing his mouth close to my ear. His expression remained entirely neutral, the perfect mask of a high-powered attorney. However, I could detect the faint, unmistakable gleam of triumph in his eyes. He opened the folder just enough for me to see the federal seals stamped on the documents inside. "Liam just got sentenced," Pierce murmured, his voice pitched perfectly, so only I could hear the absolute destruction of my former life. 8 years, no parole. He turned to the second page of his file. Jamal got 12, Pierce continued. The SEC made an absolute example out of him, ensuring he will never touch another corporate account again. Pierce shifted his focus from the federal criminal proceedings to the pathetic suburban tragedy that had unfolded alongside it. "And there is a final update on the domestic front," he whispered. "Vanessa tried to sue for child support from the personal trainer and lost. The judge threw her case out completely, leaving her with absolutely nothing. The updates hung in the air between us. 8 years, 12 years, total financial ruin. The sheer magnitude of their downfall was absolute. The golden boys of the family were now federal inmates, stripped of their designer suits and their unearned arrogance. The mistress who had paraded around my home demanding my property and my status was now a destitute punchline. They were left with nothing but the smoldering ashes of a fraudulent legacy they could no longer afford to defend. Sloane doesn't even look up from her financial projections. I stared at the glowing tablet in front of me, absorbing the undeniable proof that the cancer had been permanently excised from my existence. I did not smile. I did not gloat. My face remained a mask of absolute terrifying calm. "Fascinating," I said softly, my tone carrying the exact same weight as if he had just informed me it might rain tomorrow. I reached out and gently closed Pierce's folder, pushing it aside. I turned my attention back to the eager executives waiting around the marble table. They were completely unaware of the absolute devastation that had just been whispered into my ear. "Anyway," I announced, projecting my voice back out to the room. "Moving on to the quarterly reports, I want to see a 20% increase in our offshore holdings by the end of the fiscal year." The meeting concluded flawlessly. The executives filed out of the room, energized and terrified in equal measure. Pierce gave me one final nod before following them out, leaving me standing entirely alone in the massive sunlit penthouse. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city. The cars were tiny specks, the people moving like ants through the concrete canyons below. I had built an immense empire from the shadows, utilizing their profound underestimation of me as my greatest weapon. She closes the folder, looking directly into the camera. They thought they could break me because I stayed quiet. They didn't realize I wasn't submitting. I was just doing the math. Have you ever had to play the long game to let toxic people build their own guillotine? Drop your stories in the comments. And remember, always read the fine print before you forge a signature.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.